a CFO wouldn't have signed off on a VR training exercise in 2016. Now there's so much kind of data out there and so much learning done in that space. It's more expensive not to be training in VR. All those stats are there about, employee engagement, retention of knowledge, increased confidence, increased competency, how we can train really dangerous and hazardous situations in the safety of VR headset. It's kind of a no-brainer for these companies to be adopting these new technologies that allows them to train and upskill their workforce.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Squeezing the Juice, an extended reality podcast from Juice Immersive. This week, I have the pleasure of inviting onto the show Alex Moretti. Alex is the CEO of Fallen Planet Studios, a leading XR game studio just up the road here on the sunny northwest coast up in Southport. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on, Owen.
No problem at all. How are you doing at the moment? You okay? You busy?
We're busy as always. It feels like we're getting busier every day. Always chasing your tail, I think. I think development is generally problem solving. So if you're comfortable with putting out fires, then you can be comfortable with game development. Good
stuff. CEO and firefighter at Fallen Planet Studios.
You've read my CV.
Yeah. So, Alex, let's start at the start, if that's okay. It'd be good to just explore a bit of the origin story of the studio, of Fallen Planet, but also, to append to that, your own personal sort of story. What's brought you into this world of XR gaming?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, me personally, I've always had a background in audio and sound design, from playing in bands as a kid to having a music video production studio. I've also got a very close friend of mine who's the co-founder of Fallen Planet, who was an iOS developer and an app developer. So my kind of passion and kind of profession converged with his when he got the Developer Kit 1, the original DK1 Oculus Kickstarter campaign. So we got the DK1 in 2013. So the first, I suppose that new wave of VR, we've seen it in the 90s and prior to that. I remember playing one of the old virtual reality headsets, which is this huge headset clamped onto your skull. Back in Woolworths, probably, when I was about 8 or 9. I think I've still got the neck strain from it. So I had a really early introduction to VR, but didn't think, I suppose, that it would be kind of a career and a profession for me some 20, 30 years later. But my friend and co-founder, Mark, he got this developer kit. And I think anyone that got involved with VR early enough in those days, the experiences, the games you were trying, they weren't visually compelling. There was no kind of head tracking. Invariably, a lot of them made you kind of nauseous because they were sort of weird roller coaster experiments. But I think with the right kind of eyes, you could see where this was going to go. This immersiveness, this ability to be in the game. So yeah, I vividly remember that first experience with the Oculus and then with the Vive headset as well. We were quite fortunate that we started making an early demo for this headset, a horror walkthrough, and that's really how we began to cut our teeth with developing for VR.
Were you always going to be a horror genre sort of focused studio? How did that come about?
I mean, it was kind of a needs must, really. My co-founder experience of iOS development, not necessarily of VR, as many people didn't have back in those early days. And that's one of the things that's exciting for that medium, even today. A lot of those rules haven't been written, so you're always trying to work it out as you go. As far as the horror piece goes, we weren't particularly experienced developers back then. We weren't, didn't have backgrounds in modeling, etc. So we just buy really low quality 3D assets off the asset store, and we put them next to other really, really poor 3D assets. And then we just turn the lights down and the volume up, to kind of cover some of those sort of inadequacies. And ergo, we have horror. So I think the most important thing that we realized back in those early days, what VR did really well was immersion. And horror, as a genre, it allowed us to really focus on these things that were important: the audio, the lighting, the art direction. And that allowed those early beta testers, or just friends, guinea pigs of ours, so to speak, to kind of really get embroiled and engrossed in these early VR experiences, because they were so powerful. And for us, that was about stripping back a lot of the distractions. So there was no complicated mechanics in there. There was no puzzles to solve or keys to find to progress. You were putting a headset on and then you were somewhere else. And that was kind of, what VR does well at its core. And that's what we understood really, really early on.
So I think Fallen Planet describe yourselves as a deeply immersive VR games company, creating deeply immersive experiences. Just talk a bit for us, if you will, about that deeply bit, because what is it that makes some VR or immersive experiences not so deep and others actually really lean on the form, on the media?
Yeah, I think it comes down to things such as player agency, player presence, how immersed they feel within that world. And that can be facilitated by a number of ways, on how much kind of interaction is there going on with the environment? How much autonomy do you have over the experience that you're trying to create? The more you can give this to the player, the more immersed and engrossed they can feel into it. And then beyond that, there's things that maybe the player doesn't notice. So the haptic design, the 3D audio, the level of interaction. Does this little lever, can I move it with one hand, or is it so big that I have to move it with two hands? And it won't work with a single hand. So it's these things that if we get them all right, they can converge to make a really powerful and deeply immersive experience. And that's where, haptics that can mimic a heartbeat or that can kind of trace the grind of a gear. It's when we get this complementary sensory experience, when all of these senses are working together, that we can really get these much, much deeper levels of immersion for the players.
That's amazing. So when you guys first started out doing what you do, there wasn't, I'm guessing there wasn't really a playbook. There wasn't really this is how you create deeply immersive gameplay and experiences. So how over time has that developed, certainly from Fallen Planet's perspective?
I'd say largely there's still no playbook for that, Owen. And again, that's the exciting thing for us. If we talk about traditional game development or flat screen game development, we've got 40, 50 years of games that designers nowadays are iterating upon. They played these games as children. They've developed them and kind of honed their skills throughout their career. VR, there is no kind of rule book from it. And there's just so much more that can be done regarding the actual player is in the game. So there's no camera to direct the viewpoint. There's no real instruction we can give to the player to really direct them down a certain path. So it's got to be these lessons that we learn around the design of it, the level design, how we draw players from one spot or make them avoid another. So it's these kind of skills that we've managed to hone with our early demos. And then with our consumer releases, we also did a lot of licensing our products to arcades and theme parks, which meant we could watch a lot of players interacting with our games and seeing the kind of dynamic responses to it. That's something we always consider from a design point of view for our games. Not just what does it look like inside the headset, what does it look like watching someone from outside the headset, someone play one of our games. Are they just stood there static, moving their thumbs, or are they dynamically crouching, moving to the side if it feels narrow in there, or, taking a step back if something's encroaching upon them? And it's all of these things converging that we really consider strongly when it comes to the game design. So not just how do we provoke players inside the game, but what does it look like those observers outside of it?
With that lack of lineage, if you like, from day one in VR games development, what have been some of the sort of lessons learned or maybe game-changing moments along the way for you guys as creators of these types of experience?
Yeah, I think it's incremental learnings. I'd always say, irrespective of whatever type of design you're doing, defining the constraints is always the best starting point. And I think the best design is very aware of its constraints. And then the designer works within those constraints and finds the freedom within there. So with VR, there's always been this kind of chicken and egg with, your creative ambitions, but with the restraints of the hardware. And we're seeing these kind of creep forward now where we've got more control over what we can do. We've got more features within headsets, whether it's the head haptics of PlayStation VR 2 or the foveated rendering where we can maybe push the graphical elements of it. Haptics is a key part of it. When we first started developing our first consumer experience, it was for the Oculus Rift hooked up to PC. Oculus had shipped us that headset and it came to us as a kind of an engineering edition, and the controller was an Xbox One controller. So we're trying to design games and play with them using an Xbox controller. And then after we've shipped it, the Oculus Touch controllers are coming out now, these sort of single-handed control things. So it's really, really difficult developing for any kind of ecosystem when you're not even sure of kind of the import-output mechanisms on it. So now we're seeing more of kind of a refinement within the hardware, more of parity between the platforms of, right, this is touch controllers. And okay, the buttons might change on them, but largely the same. We know we've got individual controllers, grip buttons, trigger buttons, thumbsticks that we can move, and a couple of kind of interaction buttons on each one. So the more kind of understanding we have from our constraints, the more freedom we can have then with kind of our design ideas.
Amazing. So along the way, then, have you guys needed to sort of develop certain tools or toolkits for how you maximize the potential of the form of VR, and where else has that potentially led Fallen Planet?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, it's as much as the design ideas are being iterated upon all the time, so are the tools that are available to us. And we spent a lot of time using off-the-shelf solutions of how do we interact with an environment, grab a lever, what happens when players do that. And, fundamentally, it kind of led us to the conclusion that we needed to develop our own tools, our own proprietary tool sets that we can rely upon, that we can build functionality in. And the more functionality we have within our tools, the more creative freedom our designers have, and they can make games quicker and iterate on games quicker. So an example might be, say, pulling a lever. Previously, we might have said, all right, well, we want to pull this lever to open that door, and we'd buy something off the asset store, and we'd have the lever, and we kind of hook it up to the door from a code point of view. And every time we came to a new area, we'd be thinking of, right, well, we need to do this, and everything was kind of bespoke and custom to those specific ideas. Whereas now we've developed a code system, proprietary code system for all of our kind of interactables and puzzle managers that allow us to stack dependencies very, very simply. So now the designer says, right, well, I want to pull a lever to open that door, but the lever won't work until the button gets pressed. The button won't get pressed until the valve's turned. And if you do pull that lever, actually, we don't want it to be binary on off. We want it to be a ratchet system to incrementally open the door. Then the designer has these tools at their disposal, and they can play around with them much, much quicker, and they can get a feel of what works, as opposed to trying to build something then to see if it's going to work further down the line. So a lot of these tools, they're solutions for problems that we came up against over the past 8 years of shipping games on all major VR platforms. And then for us, multiplayer, we see it as a crucial part of VR and XR, this social presence within the game. So it wasn't just enough for us to design tools. We had to make sure that these tools could run at really low latency, necessary for kind of high-end VR experiences. So then it was really understanding, how streamlined can we make the code? How clever can we be with these interactions to make sure that we're kind of transferring the minimal amount of data across the network that still gives a really low latency but high performance experience for the users.
Yeah, I think our first interaction after our first meeting, Alex, was you guys providing Juice with a demo of the toolkit that you guys had developed in house. And I remember when I first went through that experience. I'm not necessarily a horror fan or a horror nut, but just working my way around that environment, around that house, and pulling those levers and those ratchet systems and opening those doors via the handles and stuff. Everything just felt next level in terms of how visceral an experience it was. And obviously we spend a lot of our time, and our world is in enterprise and in VR training type projects, for example, where you don't often see or feel that level of detail, I suppose it is, and real world kind of, attention to detail. So do you find now that you are also producing work and undertaking projects away from the consumer gaming market?
We're definitely getting more requests on that. And, for me, having been in this space now for 10, 11 years, that was everything. It was everything we always assumed would come in. Consumer gaming is our primary focus. All of our tools are kind of built around these elements, but the skills and the tool sets are very transferable for VR training, for EdTech, for example. Back in the early days, and me and my co-founder were thinking, right, how are we going to kind of get into this space? Where do we want to direct our attention and our energies? And thinking, what can VR be applied to? I genuinely feel it can be applied to so many different disciplines and industries, whether it's architecture for visualization, the training side of it, democratization of education, by giving people access to these immersive worlds and access to content delivered in an engaging and compelling way. I think virtual reality is so powerful for all of that. Consumer VR was always going to be the bigger market, the early adopters, from the gaming point of view. But for me, it's just interesting seeing these requests increase, because, a CFO wouldn't have signed off on a VR training exercise in 2016. Now there's so much kind of data out there and so much learning done in that space. It's more expensive not to be training in VR. All those stats are there about, employee engagement, retention of knowledge, increased confidence, increased competency, how we can train really dangerous and hazardous situations in the safety of a VR headset. It's kind of a no-brainer for these companies to be adopting these new technologies that allows them to train and upskill their workforce.
And I suppose to that point around kind of visual fidelity and just generally the credibility of the environments that you're able to place people in nowadays, that's really important, right? From an enterprise perspective, because I suppose our experience has been that particularly the younger demographic, the younger employees or apprentices or trainees coming through, there's an expectation that their employers will be using these types of tools that they've grown up with, via gaming in their bedroom often. But also that once they're in those environments and experiences, it is high quality and it is credible and it is akin to the types of gaming experiences they have. So where do you think we're at the moment in terms of enterprise use cases and projects and training type purposes being up there with those sort of more traditional, I guess, VR gaming experiences?
I think we're getting close to them converging. Fallen Planet, we cut our teeth on the consumer gaming side of it. So you're constantly the behest of, passionate gamers. I kind of veered away from opinionated, passionate gamers, and they are. And I'm a passionate gamer myself. And as a gamer, you have sort of a level of expectation. I think just in general nowadays, we have a level of expectation of what we want to see from visual quality. I used to have the old mobile phones, and all of a sudden you got a screen, and it was just incredible to be watching moving pictures on your phone. We're a long way away from that nowadays. And if a young person is playing a PlayStation 5, of an evening and then going into school to do some virtual reality education, they have an expectation about where these sort of graphical fidelity needs to be at. Yeah, there's always that VR wow moment, but it's 2024, not 2014. The idea of VR wow is gone. It's about the functionality. It's about the solutions it provides. For us to be able to build our optimization pipelines and our understanding of gamification in consumer gaming, it makes it really easy for us then to facilitate a training exercise for a commercial client, because we know what standards we need to hit. And, I think we see more companies coming into the space on a VR training side of it because of the growth in the market, not necessarily because of their own heritage or learnings within it. So I think, on that, and it's the same on, the gaming side of it, there's still a wide array of quality, that's out there and different graphical fidelities. And part of that is because there's still so much learning going on. Fallen Planet Studios, we shipped our first VR experience on a Samsung Gear VR, which is, there's a couple of them over my shoulder there. That was a Samsung S6 phone, powering a VR experience where we had dynamic flashlights on it. So for us, it was all about optimization. How can we squeeze the most out of the hardware? And we've maintained that mentality throughout all the iterations of headsets. So now when we're getting to more powerful GPUs and CPUs and Qualcomm increasing the kind of the functionality of their chipsets, then we've got almost more kind of creative freedom to play with, because we're so focused on that core optimization. And the more optimization we have around our assets, the more freedom and creativity we can have over the features within the game itself.
Good stuff. So in terms of, I suppose there's another side to that equation of younger people and their expectation level of the experiences that you build for them. On the talent front, how do you guys find it in terms of keeping young talent coming through the organization and keeping yourselves fresh, I suppose, in terms of the work that you're putting out?
Yeah, I think digital skills and a skills gap, I think that's something in the UK that we're always trying to work with. There's some really good kind of facilities near us. In Manchester, you've got something called HOST, Home of Skills and Technology. That's specifically aimed at upgrading kind of postgrads and giving them kind of real world skills. And they work on real world projects, and VR is a part of that. So they might work with, large commercial clients that want certain visualizations, and they can learn how to do that in kind of an education setting, but with a project manager delivering these real world kind of solutions to those clients. I think, with VR, so much of it has to be experienced. You have to get that empirical first-hand knowledge of it. And it's just that testing of building something and then viewing it in the headset. Like, there's no real substitute for that. Even just from going, we work on game engines, but, we have to test everything on the headset itself. It'll have different mobile GPUs compared to the GPUs in the PC. We'll have different color profiles on the screens compared to what we have on there. How something feels, in VR, it's very, very different. We have this mantra in Fallen Planet of perception, not perfection. So all of our environment artists, everyone's got a tape measure on the desk at Fallen Planet. If you take a tape measure and you want to build a door in VR and you go measure that door, you measure that table, and you make it 1-to-1 scale, if you put it in VR, it's not quite right. It's nearly there, but it's not quite right. And what we try and do with our design is get rid of all the not quite right bits. Is if we can get all of those things as close to that real feeling as possible, the perception of it, then again, all of that fades into the background. I'll still play, a VR game, and I'll put it on. I'll walk into the first room, and there'll be like a 2-foot wine bottle on the table, and the scale's just not there, and instantly you're pulled out of it, So I think what we've really understood well and what we've focused on is to get those details right, and then the details fade into the background. Then it's just a feeling of immersion that the players are left with.
Quite like the idea of a 2-foot wine bottle.
I heard that about you, Owen.
I think, this may be a slightly ignorant question, I suppose, but I know in a 360 video context, and again, that's an area we work in. It is that frustration sometimes of you're having to do the large majority of your post-production workflow on flat screen in relatively traditional video editing software or programs, only then to take that output into a VR headset and truly see what is being created and how it feels. It sounds like that's still very much a parallel in your world, but are we yet at a stage where you're able, to an extent at least, to kind of develop live in VR? Is that somewhere we're headed?
Yeah, I think it's always kind of what's most comfortable for the developers. That's definitely something that we've done and experimented with. And there's simple tools like kind of tilt brush, and there's more tools coming along all the time that lets you, work within that space. But then there's a practical element as well. Our artists, they have tablets they can draw on. They're leaning on it. Their wrist is stable and steady, and they're comfortable in the chair and doing it. Where the idea of doing that for 8 hours in kind of real world space, maybe not having something to anchor the wrist on. So there's kind of a pragmatic or a practical element to it as well. I think, it's always got to be that balance from kind of whether you're sketching ideas in VR or testing in VR or bringing beta testers in to see how people that have got no understanding of how you've developed that game and no familiarity with the level design, that's always the most important part of it. How are users that aren't familiar with this going to interact with it? And it's not just to see if it works. A lot of what we do at Fallen Planet is we try and create kind of facilities and features that provokes emergent gameplay. So, an example would be from our multiplayer system that we've developed. Okay, great. We can have lots of users in a shared space. Fantastic. And again, from the solutions for us, it's kind of a real standalone multiplayer system. It's cross-platform, so we don't have to rely on platform services. We've done that in the past, but Meta will update an SDK or PlayStation will pause on some sort of feature. So within our own systems, for us to have the control over it, we have our matchmaking, our achievements, trophies, leaderboards, which we then plug into the systems. But if we're going through kind of an effective experience, with our multiplayer system, we can trigger a scare that you see that I won't see, or a sound that I might hear that you don't hear. And then what we're trying to do there is provoke this emergent gameplay. Where people are scaring each other as opposed to just everything some scripted cinematic scene with kind of a beginning, middle, and end. They're great. And when we do experiences for theme parks, those things are really, really important. We want to make sure if we've got a large throughput of people, everyone gets that same great experience in that same set amount of time. Whereas when we're doing kind of 8-9 hour horror adventure games, we want to create moments that players kind of create themselves, because we find that the most authentic. And it's really authenticity that we strive for. Originality in horror, you could, to some extent, you can argue that a lot of it's been done, and maybe the stuff that hasn't been done yet might not be suitable for the VR games we make. But when it comes to, game and horror experiences, for me, it's authenticity that kind of trumps originality every time.
Just if you could you talk us through some of the titles that Fallen Planet have put out there into the world? And I'm particularly interested in if along that timeline there was a kind of game-changing moment or a breakthrough moment for the studio.
Yeah, so affected the manner. We go all the way back to 2013. The first demos we uploaded to the Oculus Share site. So that was a forum essentially where developers had purchased those DK1 headsets. They could download the games for free. So we uploaded Affected the Trilogy to the Oculus Share site. It was Affected the Manor, the Asylum, and the Carnival. So a spooky house, spooky hospital, spooky fairground. Again, we're not trying to rewrite the genre. We kind of deliver some of these tropes in maybe a less trite way and maybe a more kind of original way to experience it, even if the setting itself, wasn't that original. So when it came to our first consumer game, we kind of split this idea of the trilogy up, and Affected the Manor was the first experience we delivered. We did that with just myself and my co-founder, so just a team of two. We shipped onto Gear VR in June 8th, I remember it well, of 2016. We were really, really fortunate that game resonated well with that community. It was a successful experience for us. It gave us the revenues that we need to kind of progress that company and push it forwards. But still, as a team of two, we weren't in that position where we wanted to just build these really long, in-depth games. We also weren't sure if the market was ready for it then at that point. PC VR was an incredible experience, but it was also prohibitive. We'd bring people around to sort of test our experiences in the studio, and we put them in an Oculus Rift, and they'd be blown away by it. They couldn't believe VR was this far forward because it's being powered by a PC. We've got external trackers that's tracking the individual controllers, and they say, "This is amazing. How do I get it?" And you go, "Right, well, have you got a gaming PC?" And they say no, and you're like, right, okay. Well, all of a sudden we're starting to rack up numbers that are in the thousands. So we could see that this was prohibitive. So for us, as opposed to trying to make these really long feature-rich games, we took the experience of Affected the Manor, and we really learned what was kind of intrinsically valuable about that experience. We got a lot of streamers playing it early on. YouTubers like PewDiePie, Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, the largest streamers in the space were picking it up because VR was still really new. That's when we could have the VR wow moments. And we kind of understood that its simplicity was very much its strength because there wasn't these complicated mechanics. It wasn't difficult to understand. It's press one button, move in the direction you're looking, but then really enjoy, as far as horror goes, this immersive experience. It was very good at bringing people into virtual reality. So if you bought a VR headset and you were playing Affected the Manor and, hopefully you thought it was a cool experience, if you brought your friend round to your house and you wanted to show them VR, invariably you'd put them in Affected the Manor because it was one button, easy for them to do. They could get that immersive experience, and then you could film them on your phone, jumping around, getting scared. So it kind of, it worked on several different levels. And we understood this, the ability of that experience to bring people into VR. It was important to us, for the success side of it, but it was important to those platforms as well. Oculus, Facebook, Meta, so PlayStation now, HTC Vive, Google Daydream, Pico, lots of headsets. Some of them aren't around anymore. We knew what was important to them was also important to us. So we were able to leverage that experience and really port it to as many different platforms as possible. That built our own technical experience of these platforms. So how a PlayStation VR submission process is different from a Meta submission process. How the controller scheme on a PSVR again might be different from a Pico headset. It gave us revenue streams, which were for us is important. We're still a business. We still try and, have more coming in than what we get going out. So even though it wasn't a large market then, we knew that all of these individual revenue streams would give us stability. So in the consumer side of it, we continued to port affected the manner to many, many different platforms. We then took a licensing model around it in 2016, and we would create different versions of it for VR arcades or VR theme parks. We also worked with a lot of hardware partners, hardware peripherals to VR. So they could be omnidirectional treadmills where you're walking on the spot with a VR headset, like the Virtuix Omni. We still work with them today, or the Cat VR in China. We work with a company called Ultraleap, which had mid-air haptic feedback, so no gloves. They use ultrasound, and we could modulate these vibrations on the palm and then kind of visualize in VR what was creating these sensations, whether it was a Ouija board spinning or the hand looking like it's on fire. So that was affected the visit. We worked with a French company and created Affected the Hotel, which again was working with a real world elevator that was installed in Las Vegas on the Strip. So that was again a real linear experiences, 4 or 5 minutes, same experience for everyone. So we really kind of flexed our muscles in the location-based VR space. We made Affected Ghost Rider. So again, an extension of the IP, but on a motion simulator platform that we licensed to a VR theme park in Korea. So we could continue understanding VR development, but in these kind of bite-sized chunks that again fed into our model of more individual SKUs and experiences, more individual revenues to bring stability into the company. As far as kind of the landmark moments, I'd say it's less on our side internally because we've always been incrementally just sort of grinding it, improving our tools, our systems, our understandings of it. I'd say, what a kind of landmark moment for that medium was probably the Quest 1 headset coming out. It was a standalone 6-DoF headset. You could put it in your backpack, take it to your friends, put it on, and then have these really cool experiences in 6 degrees of freedom. We've seen that really extend up until Quest 3 now. So Quest 1 was a cool sort of glimpse at that. Quest 2 maybe landed really, really well and resonated very much with those consumers because now we have the functionalities of 6-DoF, but we had the Qualcomm XR2 chipset. We could push the graphical fidelity more. We were having real-time shadows running on it, and we could make much, much richer experiences.
Yeah, I think you must sometimes feel like you've been in business for 3 times the years that you actually have, where so much has changed so quickly. I can actually just recommend as an aside the look up the YouTube video of PewDiePie testing out the Manor. It was the Manor, wasn't it? And that makes for a comedic brew break if you've got a few minutes. So yeah, fantastic. If I can just revisit talent quickly, what's the makeup of the team at Fallen Planet these days, perhaps as opposed to back in the early days?
Well, we're a 12-person team now. We have environment artists, 3D modelers. We have programmers. The coders are really important to us when we're building all of our systems and testers. We have production COOs. We've got kind of audio department in it. So we've now got kind of a fully rounded team, and we've always got a network of subcontractors should we need to scale up or outsource certain areas of kind of art production. I say from a team point of view, the most important thing really to me, it is the people in Fallen Planet. It's not myself and my co-founder really making these sort of experiences kind of till 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, which is largely how we got this far, I think that's always it's how you kind of start most businesses by yourself. It's really kind of working into the wee small hours off your own personal drive. It's not particularly sustainable, not over a long period of time. So I think the culture that we tried to build at Fallen Planet really is people first. And I know it's cliche. I really do, but it is the team that make the games for us. Well, I've still got a really big kind of input on the audio and this kind of sound director. My co-founder, again, really rooted in game design, but maybe a little bit further down that pipeline now. But we're still very much involved in the development. But it's about, I think, sort of deferring responsibility and accountability to team members. We've done a lot of upskilling on the optimization that's needed for virtual reality. Again, we've got a huge amount of experience in this space. We want to pass that on. and also make sure that we're giving autonomy to our designers and developers as well. I think a structure that isn't reliant on micromanagement, but instead has like kind of clear feedback loops within it, so we can almost kind of devolve a lot of sort of key decisions to our designers, again, against the backdrop of shared objectives. So what we want, myself and my co-founder, the senior leadership team, the game director, our creative director, what we want is then transferred down to our team, and they can pick that up and they can decide how to go about developing these things. Like, what resources do they need? What timelines are they going to have alongside it? I think it's kind of having this mix of kind of autonomy, but kind of clear kind of values and objectives that gives our designers then freedom. And I think it's freedom with a sense of purpose that kind of fundamentally kind of goes into kind of employee happiness and employee satisfaction. And I think the combat of autonomy, because obviously you can say, well, you're giving our designers autonomy. How can they just go off and just, how do you protect yourself from that? Again, it's a clear understanding of what's important as a studio, but then also we get kind of the constraint of that autonomy through the cohesion of the team. We're working towards these shared objectives. We know what's important. We can have ideas and we can iterate really, really quickly on them. We always talk about the size of Fallen Planet being its strength. We don't sit here going, I wish we were 30, wish we were 50. I think it's going, right, where are we now? Right, well, that's our superpower. Our ability to sit next to each other and communicate very, very quickly, to troubleshoot ideas, that cross-pollination, that communication and collaboration. And then how that, ultimately then is distilled through compromise, because we're all really passionate designers and we all have wants and needs, but having a structure that allows us all to feel heard, but then to buy into these single decisions that we have to move forward for. I'd say that's probably my key focus. I could sit here talking for an hour just about the teams and the culture and kind of the structure we're trying to build there.
And just finally on that, are you largely a UK talent-based company, or do you attract people from much further afield?
We get a lot of it's the way of the world now, with remote work being a possibility, and that's definitely things that we look at. But if we think back to the heady days of lockdown 1, we were a team of 3 then. We just brought in a CTO from Sao Paulo, Brazil. The hardest way of going about a first hire. We brought them in on a Tech Nation visa, on an exceptional talent Tech Nation visa. That's the name of it. And my CTO reminds me of his exceptional talent at least once a week. I got him a T-shirt that said exceptionally talented on it, but that's another story. But we were going into lockdown 1, March 16th, I can remember it clearly, and we were just about to push an update for Affected the Manor, some free DLC, and what should have taken a couple of weeks took a couple of months. And there was a lot going on in the world back then, but it was because we'd gone from sort of sat next to each other communicating every day to kind of scheduling a Zoom call and we can't make that one, so let's rearrange it to hear that, So when it came to us coming back into the office, we ended up coming back into Fallen Planet September 2020. So when the regulations got lifted, we were fortunate. We've got a lot of space. We had clear guidelines, so it was safe. It was optional as well. Everyone could work at home. But my other two, my co-founder and the CTO, they'd both done 6 months of homeschooling with the kids, so they were quite happy to get back into the studio. Yeah. We understood then that we wanted to build a team in-house for all of those reasons that we mentioned of communication and kind of collaboration. So that's still something that's important to us now. Yes, we can accommodate remote and hybrid, and they're things that we'll do as we continue to grow. But getting this core nucleus of designers, of what we feel are real kind of specialists within XR, we've been able to do this because of being so close to one another, because of being agile and adaptive and being able to share and learn as a team.
Beautiful. Can I just explore the fact that you are an extended reality development studio, not exclusively a virtual reality development studio? So where are things up to in your view, Alex, with things like mixed reality gaming experience, for example, and how much of that are you guys kind of involved in right now?
It's definitely something we look at. It's not from a practical point of view, it's not a huge difference to us, and VR, AR, XR, MR, like we've been here since 2013. So we've watched all of that. We just sit in the background. Apple would call as spatial architects, because they're very much on the spatial computing side of it, which I don't particularly mind. I'm not sort going, oh, now they're calling this and now they're calling that. We don't get too involved with the semantics of it. It's fundamentally, it's spatial development and all these kind of learnings that we talk about of scale and haptics and positional audio, player feedback. These are really, really important, whether that's in a VR environment or just a pass-through environment, which is still virtual in its sense, or it's still augmented, or it's still mixed reality, whichever way you want to define it. To some extent, it's all of these things. And XR should be a catch-all term. Again, totally fine with that. Let's really hone down. I think, not to go off piece, but I think some of the problem that we had in the industry early on was the industry couldn't really make its mind up what it was and how to communicate it. And something like VR, it's so visceral when you put the headset on, but you don't really understand it until you get to that point. And to have kind of a barrier with just the kind of taxonomy around it of what these things are called, we discussed this with kind of fellow developers of what is this, VR or MR? What are you calling that? So even now I'll say we're XR developers, but sometimes I might communicate it as we are VR/XR developers, because I kind of feel I have to hammer home that VR is still a thing. So, I think the semantics is one side of it. The lessons that you learn, they're the same. It's just how we're rendering out this environment. From a design point of view, mixed reality, I'd say it's got more challenges. It's fine to do, let's say, an MR, let's call it mixed, an MR experience where you've got maybe you're in your home and the home knows where your walls are, and then we blow holes in the walls and zombies come through it and you've got to shoot them. Cool, That's enjoyable for a time, but it's still an enjoyable experience. But beyond that, now all of a sudden it's like, right, okay, we're trying to make an experience within a space, and we don't know as designers what that space looks like. We've had feedback from certain platforms that do MR that say maybe focus more on the ceiling than on the floor, because, houses tend to be messy. Maybe there's a dog running around, or there's a coffee table at different sizes. So it's hard as a designer to try and accommodate for all of these things, where we have a bit more blank space on the ceiling. Also, whereabouts is it going to be played? Geographically, traditionally homes in Japan are smaller than perhaps some homes in kind of, America maybe. So there's a design element that you're never kind of fully aware of. So that can be more difficult to design for. But coming back to these, good designers are aware of its constraints. You decide what those constraints are at the start of that roadmap, at that project, and then you work within that. So you might say, we assume that a floor, a house maybe have 2 meters squared of floor space that we want to use, or we're going to keep everything on ceiling because they tend to be pretty blank and, the most open space of an individual's room. So again, there's different types of challenges with it. With VR, we have control over that, of these environments. Do we want to make them big or small? That really transfers to the feeling that we want to have in the player. It translates to how many features we want to have in there. If we've got a huge room in VR and we have lots of props and stuff like that, there's going to be a lot of heavy optimization going on it that maybe we can't have other dynamic features. But if we want to take that user into a much smaller space, have the camera rendering less, then we save more of that optimization for other features, like maybe more players in a space. So again, always understanding the constraints and what you want to achieve against the backdrop of, is it VR, is it MR? Do we know the play space, don't we? These are questions that should be kind of involved at the beginning of every creative ideation session.
Good stuff. I do want to ask you actually about what your sort of top tips would be for perhaps more kind of enterprise users or clients as they're starting to enter maybe early ideation. But just before I do, AI, artificial intelligence, how much is that playing a part in your world now? And is it having a direct impact on how you are developing games?
I mean, I use ChatGPT every day, on various different things. I think, these are real tools. And part of that's me just testing it out. It's not asking for the answer for everything, but it's using it as that thinking partner. And it could be for various different things. I might have a talk or, a webinar and thinking, right, these are my ideas. What's the best way to structure it? And it can give these things. I might have a grant application that, again, I'm trying to describe something in a certain way and it can reframe and phrase it. Mid-Journey would probably use that for 12, 18 months. Again, it just allows us to ideate quicker. It's not there to do anything kind of for us. It's for us to direct these tools. They are very, very much tools. And, Fallen Planet, look, myself and my co-founder, we embraced virtual reality, went all in on it, essentially in 2013. Looking into these kind of emerging technologies and how they can impact and kind of enhance our daily lives. It's within our DNA, again, to pull a cliche. So with kind of the influx of AI and AI tools, they're things we look at all the time. I always temper it by saying AI was in Pong. There's always been some sort of artificial intelligence within games. It's not necessarily been text to world or what we're starting to see. But from us as designers that want to ship stable games for consumers to play, and we're very focused on our own bespoke optimization pipelines, for example, some of those tools don't really integrate specifically into what we're doing now, but we know that these things change all the time. So that's why we're continually looking to evaluate them and to try and see how they work in our process. A big part of our horror experience is our antagonists, our monsters, which are going to taunt and tease the players. So we've developed our own AI state machine to control these monsters. It's important for us that the enemies have got, a sentient, a feel, a personality to them. So the state machine to control our monsters means that, our antagonists, they can hear the player, see the player, remember where they were. They can have varying stress levels and range attacks, trigger adaptive audio to give that player feedback. So whilst we're not programming our own large language models, we are definitely utilizing AI in the gameplay side of it. Also, where I feel that AI can also come in more is when we ship our next game and we're assessing how those players are interacting with it, what areas they're going to more, where are they spending longer than others. AI can essentially allow us to efficiently process that data, but still visualize it in ways that we want to visualize it. Data tells a story, but you've got to kind of define what story you want. So it's great that we can use AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to sift through this data, but it's only relevant to the kind of KPIs that are important to us.
Good stuff. A couple more just before we wrap, if that's okay. You mentioned before about that kind of critical early ideation phase. What would your kind of guidance or top tips be, Alex, for perhaps some of our kind of more enterprise world clients when they're embarking on perhaps a VR training project or some kind of immersive experience based piece of work?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that VR is just the medium within which this training is going to take place. It allows for more engagement, greater knowledge retention. It allows for a greater sense of presence. It's still up to that, the enterprise to define, right, what do we want to measure here? Because if you can measure something, you can manage it. Are you measuring competency, level of time to complete the task? Are you measuring how maybe a fireman or fire person might be scanning an environment? So we're using eye tracking to ensure that they're looking around these different areas. It's really up to that company to understand what is it that we feel gives us the feedback that our employees progress in the way that we want them to. And then we can build experiences tailored to this, and we can build high-end experiences, and we can gamify them in a way that's compelling for the employee. So they kind of finish it, get the task, and they go, right, I want to go again. I want to beat that. This is getting fun. Right, I understand how I can get this better. I remember doing an experience in San Francisco, probably in 2018, which was a welding, how good can I weld in virtual reality? I must have played it about 12 times, and I'm not a welder, and I've not thought about welding since, but it was well designed, well developed, and it was gamified, and when we kind of juxtapose that against maybe traditional training mechanisms of, work sheets or multiple choice questions. I've never come out of a multiple choice test and gone, oh, incredible, I can't wait to do that again. Whereas in VR we do, but it's really up to that kind of, I suppose, that the collaboration between the designer, and that kind of that enterprise of what's important to them to measure. And then we can discuss about how we can do that in the most compelling way to give the enterprise feedback, and the employee feedback as well, so that it functions as the solution it's looking for. Greater knowledge retention, greater competency, greater confidence within those employees.
Great stuff. Lovely. Thanks, Alex. Just finally, what does the future look like for Fallen Planet and I'd argue kind of XR gaming more widely?
Yeah, I mean, Fallen Planet continued to build that RIP, to build out the functionality of our tool sets, because that really feeds into game scope for us. We have a multiplayer system, so we can make multiplayer games. As you build out combat systems and weapon systems, driving if we wanted to, that feeds into the creative game scope. We'll continue to kind of revisit location-based VR. I've always kept my eye on that because personally I'm a big fan of it. COVID, thankfully, it's starting to become a distant memory. So we've seen some really cool experiences in that space. The old, PC or laptop in a backpack, that's going now as we're getting a more streamlined headsets with longer battery life, Wi-Fi 6, where we can get more high-end content streamed to it. We'll continue to kind of build partnerships in the enterprise space. All of our tools and all of our game development transfers really well into that area. And again, our knowledge of creating high-end gaming experiences and gamified experiences really complements what enterprises are trying to achieve for it. As to where things are going in the industry, it was great to see Apple come into the space. Again, if I go back to 2013 with my co-founder, these were things we spoke about at the time. Wouldn't it be incredible if Apple releases a headset? We've seen that. The most valuable company in the world is releasing an XR headset. Okay, it's $3,500. All right, it's not using the word VR. A lot of the kind of features are floating 2D screens. Again, I'm totally fine with that. From a price point, Apple tend to make things that we want before they make things that we can afford. They drive that kind of FOMO. The pass-through first, the floating 2D screens, they're things that just function well. So if I'm, I don't have to understand a whole lot about VR or XR or anything to know that if I put on this headset and I can watch my Netflix anywhere on a 200-inch screen, right, I'm sold. I see that solution. So Apple are really good at kind of hand-holding their consumers and bringing them into the space. They're really good at, I think, as well, focusing on their ecosystem. So I remember seeing, adverts for Apple Watches about 12 months ago. It was starting to bring this kind of tap kind of mechanic, this tap interaction on the Apple Watch. Well, we're seeing that as a way of interacting with the Apple Vision Pro headset. So again, it's like, Apple's great at building an ecosystem that kind of folds around its users, where there's a reliance and a dependency between these products. So I think the Vision Pro being in the space is really, really great. It's non-controllers, it's heavy eye tracked, hand tracking. Okay, these again are things for designers to understand. I'm sure there'll be controllers at some point for the Vision Pro, whether it's a peripheral or not, a gaming peripheral. We've seen precedents in the space, like by these cool backbone, controllers for the phones to play in. So I think we're going to see continued reliance on eye tracking and hand tracking. Going further down the line, brain control interfaces, I'd say. We're seeing Elon with the kind of Neuralink. Again, a headset that's maybe got built within it these kind of electrodes that's going to sit in there and take these brain signals and use them to control or to instruct or kind of infer controls to XR experiences. That feels like a very natural progression, and also a convergence of technologies. We're seeing these kind of BCIs in medical settings, some incredible solutions for them. And then obviously we're seeing a lot of development on the XR side of things as well, and then AI underpinning all of it. So I think we'll see a convergence of these technologies where these brain controller interfaces, Neuralinks, they're going to integrate within this kind of ecosystem that gives users greater control, customization, and personalization of these XR experiences.
Great stuff. Thanks, Alex. So all these years in, you're still excited when you get up in the morning and come into work?
Still shattered in one. Yeah, no, very much so. I think it's just such an exciting space. Fundamentally, we're making games. We're making it for an incredible new medium where the rules are still to be defined, and we're learning every day. As designers, fundamentally, that's all we can kind of hope for. And it's a burgeoning industry where we're seeing improvements in the technology all the time, and the hardware and the software that underpins it. So, our main focus is really to maintain this attitude of continued learning, of humility, as we still see all of these features and functions come into our space, and to understand how can we create the most compelling and engaging experiences for our users, whether it's in enterprise or consumer gaming. Build out the IP, build out the tool sets, but fundamentally build out the knowledge of our team of how to really express ourselves within XR.
Lovely stuff. Alex, we could talk all day. I know we could, and sometimes we do. But for now, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Just before we let you go, how can people follow yourself and Fallen Planet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fallenplanetstudios.com is the website. We've got kind of our services in there, contact forms, job openings. We're on Twitter, Fallen Planet VR, probably. LinkedIn, of course, I'm on there, Alex Moretti. And of course, reaching out to Juice, and we can connect through those channels as well.
Great stuff, Alex. Thank you so much for all your valued time today. I know you're very busy at the moment, particularly. So really appreciate you coming on, and would love to have you back on Squeezing the Juice again in the future.
Thank you very much, Owen. Anytime.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Squeezing the Juice. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to give us a thumbs up, a like, or a follow, wherever you get your podcasts, it'll help us grow our tribe as we build the pod. I look forward to welcoming you back soon when we'll be squeezing the juice with another guest from the world of XR. Until then, take care.